10 twisted true crimes with endings you won't believe. What if the victim wasn't really a victim? What if the killer was hiding in plain sight? Or worse, behind a mask you'd never expect? These aren't your average true crime stories. These are tales with twists so bizarre, so mind-bending. They'll have you questioning every detail until the final reveal. Missing people who might not be missing. Murderers who accidentally confess. Crimes that unravel into something far stranger than fiction. Ready to dive in? Just remember, not everything is as it seems. The Watcher House. A dream home, a nightmare letter. When Derek and Maria Broaddus bought their dream home in Westfield, New Jersey, they never imagined it would become the center of one of the most chilling and baffling real-life mysteries in suburban America. It was the summer of 2014, and the couple had just closed on a stunning 6-bedroom Dutch colonial at 657 Boulevard, a tree-lined street in one of the safest, most affluent towns in the state. Their 3 young children were excited to move into the spacious home, and the couple began planning renovations before officially settling in. But just days after the purchase, a strange letter arrived in the mailbox. No return address, no signature, just a few ominous words that would set off a chain of events worthy of a psychological thriller. The first letter. The letter began innocently enough, welcoming the family to the neighborhood. But the tone quickly turned sinister. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, the anonymous writer claimed. I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. It wasn't just the eerie tone that sent chills down the Broaddus' spines. It was the disturbing amount of detail the letter contained. The writer knew the family's name, knew they had children, knew the layout of the home. I see you've already started renovations. The dumpster is a nice touch, the letter read. But the most haunting part came when the letter began referring to the children. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. The Broadduses were horrified. Who would send such a message? A prankster? A neighbor? A mentally unstable former owner? They immediately contacted the police. An investigation was opened, but there was little to go on. No fingerprints, no CCTV footage, no leads. Then, a second letter arrived. The second letter. The second note confirmed their worst fears. They were being watched closely. I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me, it read. Have they found out what's in the walls yet? In time they will. This was no ordinary threat. It felt like a game, or worse, a ritual. The writer referred to themselves as the Watcher and claimed it was a role passed down through generations. They implied that their family had been watching 657 Boulevard for decades and that they were merely the next in line to fulfill the duty. The Broadduses were now terrified. Their kids hadn't even moved in yet, and the house already felt like a trap. They halted renovations, pulled their children from ever entering the house again, and hired private investigators, FBI agents, and even forensic linguists to analyze the letters. But nothing came of it. The town turns. As news of the story spread, the quiet town of Westfield found itself in the spotlight. But instead of rallying around the Broaddus family, some neighbors began to turn on them. Rumors swirled. Was it a hoax? A scam to get out of buying an expensive house they couldn't afford? Lawsuits followed. The Broadduses sued the previous owners, claiming they'd known about similar letters but failed to disclose them. The case was dismissed, but it raised new questions. Had they received letters too? If so, why didn't they warn the Broadduses? More disturbingly, it came out that a neighbor had written an eerie letter as a joke to another neighbor around the same time, though police ruled them out as the Watcher. Suspicion bounced from house to house, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. Then came the third letter. The third letter. After a period of quiet, another envelope appeared. Where have you gone to? The Watcher wrote. 657 Boulevard is missing you. And then, one of the most chilling lines in all 3 letters. Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away, but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. The Broadduses knew they couldn't move their family into this house. It wasn't just about the letters anymore. It was about the psychological torment, the sense that someone was out there watching and possibly planning something. They tried to sell the house. No one wanted it. They tried to rent it out. Even that came with difficulty. Eventually, they were forced to rent the house at a loss. And in 2019, 5 years after buying the home, they finally sold it at a $400,000 loss. Who was the watcher? Despite extensive investigations by police, private detectives, and internet sleuths, the watcher was never identified. The letters had no fingerprints. The postmarks revealed nothing useful. And the theories multiplied. An obsessed neighbor? Someone angry about renovations disturbing the historic character of the street? A disgruntled bidder? Someone who lost the house and lashed out? The Broadduses themselves? A theory fueled by skepticism and lawsuits, though they always denied it, and there was never any proof. No one has ever been arrested. The current owners of 657 Boulevard, as of today, have reported no new letters. The watcher seems to have vanished as mysteriously as they appeared. Aftermath. The case left a scar on the Broaddus family, who were deeply traumatized by the ordeal. It also left a stain on the idyllic image of suburban Westfield, a town that prided itself on safety and charm. Netflix adapted the story into a fictionalized series in 2022 titled The Watcher, bringing it back into the public eye. But in real life, there's no satisfying ending. No masked figure caught. No justice served. Just a beautiful house and a question that still haunts anyone who hears the story. Who was watching 657 Boulevard? And why? Story number 2. The disappearance of Nicholas Barkley. A missing boy returns, or does he? In June of 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley vanished without a trace in San Antonio, Texas. He had spent the day playing basketball with friends and was last seen calling home for a ride. His mother told him to walk, just a short distance, but Nicholas never arrived. He was known to be troubled, a rebellious teen with a history of running away and brushes with the law. So at first, the police believed it was just another case of a kid skipping town. But when days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the worry turned to dread. Nicholas Barkley had disappeared into thin air. 3 years later, a miracle or a lie? In 1997, the phone rang in the Barkley household. On the line was a man claiming to be from a children's shelter in Spain. He said they had found Nicholas, scared, confused, and unable to explain how he had gotten across the Atlantic. The family, in disbelief, was overjoyed. When Nicholas arrived in Texas, the welcome was emotional. He looked different, darker hair, new tattoos, and a thicker accent. But after all, he'd been missing for 3 years. Trauma could explain a lot, they reasoned. He said he had been kidnapped, passed between military and pedophile rings, and tortured. It was a horrifying story, and they believed it. At first, the cracks appear. Journalists, FBI agents, and even some of Nicholas's extended family started to feel something was off. For one, the boy now spoke with a heavy French accent. He claimed his captors had altered his eye color and hair through experiments. But the big red flag? Nicholas Barkley had blue eyes. This boy had brown. Despite these inconsistencies, his family insisted it was him. Trauma changes people, they said. Why wouldn't they want to believe their son had come home? But one man wasn't buying it. Private investigator Charlie Parker. And Parker decided to dig deeper. The truth comes out. Parker snapped a photograph of Nicholas and sent it to a colleague in Europe. Facial recognition confirmed what he suspected. This wasn't Nicholas Barkley. It was Frederic Bourdin, a 23-year-old French con artist known to authorities as the Chameleon. He had assumed dozens of false identities across Europe, often pretending to be lost or abused teens to gain shelter and sympathy. But this time, his scheme had gone further than ever. He hadn't just fooled strangers. He had managed to infiltrate a grieving American family. Why did the family believe him? This is where the story takes a darker turn. When authorities confronted Bourdin, he confessed. Yes, he was not Nicholas. Yes, he had faked it all. He had found Barkley's information in a missing persons database and used it to impersonate him. Why? He said he longed for love and family. But Bourdin made a startling accusation. He believed the Barkleys knew he wasn't Nicholas and accepted him anyway. Why? Because they had something to hide. In Frederic's twisted theory, he suggested that maybe the real Nicholas had been murdered, and the family embraced him as a cover-up. Authorities found no proof of this, but the allegation cast a long shadow. To this day, the real Nicholas Barkley has never been found. Aftermath. Frederick Borden was sentenced to 6 years in U.S. prison for passport fraud and perjury. After his release, he returned to France, married, and had children. He later went back to his old ways, adopting new false identities, though he claims he's changed. The story was turned into a chilling 2012 documentary titled The Imposter, which dives deep into both the deception and the disturbing question that still lingers. How could a family not recognize their own child? Story number 3, the murder of D.D. Blanchard. A sick daughter, a devoted mother, and a murder that shocked the world. On the outside, D.D. and Gypsy Rose Blanchard looked like the perfect mother-daughter duo. They were inseparable. D.D., a doting single mom, cared full-time for Gypsy, who was confined to a wheelchair and suffering from a long list of illnesses: leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and more. They were well known in their community in Springfield, Missouri. Local charities helped them. Neighbors brought food. Habitat for Humanity even built them a house. They were survivors, people said, an inspiring pair. But behind the pastel walls of their small pink home, something truly sinister was growing. The murder. In June 2015, a Facebook post from DD's account sent a jolt through their friends and neighbors. "That bitch is dead." At first, people assumed it was a cruel hack or prank. But then another comment appeared. ING slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet, innocent daughter. Her scream was so ING loud. The police were called. When they entered the Blanchards' home, they found DD's body, stabbed multiple times, left to rot for days. Gypsy was gone. Had she been kidnapped? Not exactly. The big reveal. A few days later, police tracked Gypsy to Wisconsin. She was alive and walking, not in a wheelchair, not visibly sick. In fact, she looked normal. Even more shocking, she wasn't alone. With her was her secret online boyfriend, Nicholas Gojon, the man who had stabbed DD to death with a knife Gypsy provided. The story began to unravel fast, and it was far stranger than anyone could have imagined. Gypsy's truth. Gypsy had grown up believing she was terminally ill. Her mother told her she had the mind of a 7-year-old, that she needed a feeding tube, and that she'd never walk again. In reality, Gypsy was a healthy young woman. Her mother had fabricated her illnesses for years, dragging her to doctor after doctor, lying to medical staff, even shaving Gypsy's head to make her look like a cancer patient. It was a textbook case of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare psychological disorder where a caregiver fakes or induces illness in someone else, usually to gain attention or sympathy. Gypsy had been emotionally and physically abused her entire life. She had no access to the outside world, no formal education, and no idea how to escape. Until she met Nicholas Gojon online. The plan. Nicholas was no Prince Charming. He had a history of mental illness and violent fantasies. But to Gypsy, he was a lifeline. After months of secret communication, they began plotting DD's murder. In June 2015, he took a bus to Missouri, snuck into the Blanchard home while DD slept, and stabbed her to death. Gypsy waited in the bathroom, covering her ears. They then fled to Wisconsin, mailing the infamous Facebook messages as a twisted way of announcing their crime. It didn't take long for police to find them. Justice or mercy? Gypsy Rose Blanchard pled guilty to second-degree murder and received 10 years in prison. Many believed she was more victim than criminal, and that her punishment was too harsh. Nicholas Gojon, on the other hand, was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. His lawyers argued that he was manipulated by Gypsy and that he wasn't mentally capable of understanding his actions. The jury disagreed. What now? Gypsy's case gained national attention, sparking documentaries, podcasts, and a hit Hulu series, The Act. Public opinion was sharply divided. Was she a murderer or a victim of unthinkable abuse? Could both be true? As for Gypsy, she was granted parole and released in December 2023. She's now living under a new name and trying to rebuild her life, a life she was never allowed to live. And the pink house? It was demolished. Too many ghosts. Too many lies. Story number 4. The double life of Audrey Marie Hilley. A loving wife, a tragic illness, and a resurrection no one saw coming. In the 1970s, in the quiet town of Anniston, Alabama, Audrey Marie Hilley seemed to have it all. A loving husband, Frank. 2 beautiful children. a charming southern grace that made everyone like her. They lived a modest, middle-class life, and to outsiders, the Hillies looked like the American dream. But that dream shattered when Frank suddenly fell gravely ill. Doctors couldn't pinpoint what was wrong: nausea, fatigue, and worsening symptoms over time, until Frank died in 1975. The cause? Reportedly hepatitis. No one suspected foul play. At least, not yet. Another family tragedy. After Frank's death, Marie collected life insurance and moved on. But just a few years later, another family member fell sick. This time, her teenage daughter, Carol. She began experiencing strange symptoms: numbness in her hands and feet, loss of muscle control, violent vomiting. Doctors were stumped until someone ordered a tox screen. The results were shocking. Arsenic. In high doses. Carol had been slowly poisoned. This time, suspicion turned to the person closest to her, her mother, Audrey Marie Hilly. The arrest and the escape. Authorities exhumed Frank's body. Tests revealed the same thing: arsenic poisoning. Marie was arrested and charged with attempted murder, Carol, and murder, Frank. But Audrey was clever and charming. While out on bail, she vanished. What followed next sounds like something out of a thriller novel, but it's 100% real. The reinvention. Marie fled across state lines, ditched her identity, and became Robbie Hannon. She reinvented her entire life. She found work in Florida, then moved to New Hampshire, where she married a man named John Homan, who had no idea who she really was. He believed she was a soft-spoken, intelligent woman with a tragic past. But fake lives are hard to maintain. Robbie claimed she had a twin sister named Terry Martin, who would sometimes visit or write letters. In reality, Terry was also Marie, sending letters to herself to keep the lie going. Then, in 1982, Robbie supposedly died from cancer. John was devastated. A memorial was held. 3 days later, he met Robbie's twin sister Terry, who looked an awful lot like his dead wife. Because she was his dead wife, Marie had faked her own death. Again, caught by a typo, John accepted the bizarre twin story for a while. But when Terry went to apply for a job, she accidentally used the name Robbie Hannon on paperwork. Authorities were alerted. Fingerprints confirmed the truth. Terry was actually Audrey Marie Hilly, the fugitive wanted for murder and attempted murder in Alabama. She was arrested in 1983. After 4 years on the run and living multiple lives, her lies had finally caught up with her. Final escape and death. In 1987, after serving a few years of her sentence, Marie was granted a weekend furlough, a brief release from prison for good behavior. Big mistake. She vanished again. It was winter in Alabama. She survived several days on the run in the cold, until she was found lying in the woods, near death from hypothermia. She died shortly after at the hospital. Legacy of lies. Audrey Marie Hilly left behind a trail of poisoned family members, fake identities, and one of the most bizarre true crime sagas in U.S. history. Her story defied logic and proved that some people will go to any lengths to escape justice. She killed her husband. She nearly killed her daughter. She married again under a fake name. She faked her own death, then returned as her own twin. You couldn't make this up. Story number 5, BTK's floppy disk fail. He taunted police for decades. Then he asked a simple question, and it destroyed him. Between 1974 and 1991, the city of Wichita, Kansas was terrorized by a sadistic serial killer who called himself BTK, short for bind, torture, kill. His crimes were cold, calculated, and methodical. He murdered entire families. He broke into homes, waited for his victims, then carried out horrific acts of violence with chilling precision. But BTK wasn't content with simply killing. He wanted fame. He wanted credit. He needed people to know how smart he was. So he wrote letters. Detailed, gloating letters to police and media outlets, describing his crimes and mocking investigators who couldn't catch him. Then, he went silent. For more than 10 years, there were no murders. No letters. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And he almost got away with it. The comeback of a killer. In 2004, more than 3 decades after his first known murder, BTK suddenly resurfaced. He began sending letters to local media again. Packages filled with creepy drawings, old photos of his victims, and puzzles designed to taunt law enforcement. Why come back? Simple. He missed the spotlight. The media frenzy reignited. Wichita panicked all over again. The killer, who had faded into urban legend, was now active and clearly enjoying himself. He was playing a cat-and-mouse game with police. But there's a problem with games. Sometimes you outsmart yourself. The fatal question. In one of his communications, BTK asked police a seemingly innocent, but incredibly stupid, question. Can I communicate with you using a floppy disk? I promise it won't be traceable. Be honest. Police, barely able to believe their luck, responded through a newspaper ad, pretending to be cooperative. Rex, it will be okay to use the disk. BTK took the bait. He mailed a purple 3.5-inch floppy disk to a local news station, along with a gold chain, a photocopy of a victim's ID, and a rambling letter. What he didn't know was that floppy disks are extremely traceable, and this one held a hidden digital footprint. BTK unmasked. Police quickly analyzed the metadata on the disk. It revealed a deleted Word document, created by someone named Dennis, on a computer registered to Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. There, they found Dennis Rader, a married father of two, president of the church council, Boy Scout troop leader, and, as it turned out, one of the most meticulous serial killers in American history. Surveillance confirmed the match. DNA from a pap smear taken from his daughter, on file with medical records, sealed it. Dennis Rader was arrested in February 2005. The confession. Rader confessed immediately. In fact, he gave a full, detailed, emotionless account of every murder. He talked about his victims the way someone might talk about home repair projects. Step by step. Calculated. Cold. In court, he described how he bound them, how he tortured them, how he killed them, all while seated calmly, in a tie, like a man giving a PowerPoint presentation. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. No possibility of parole. The irony. After all the games, codes, and perfect crimes, BTK, one of the most elusive killers in U.S. history, was finally brought down not by high-tech forensics or a sudden breakthrough, but by a floppy disk and his own arrogance. He asked police to be honest. They lied, and he fell for it. Story number 6. The canoe man who faked his death. He walked into the sea and disappeared. 5 years later, he posed for a photo, smiling in Panama. In 2002, the quiet coastal town of Seaton Carew in northern England was rocked by a bizarre story. John Darwin, a mild-mannered former teacher turned prison officer, was reported missing after a canoeing accident. His wife, and tearfully told authorities that John had taken his kayak out for a short paddle, something he did often, and never returned. Despite an extensive search and rescue operation, no trace of him was ever found. Eventually, a shattered and Darwin was left to mourn her husband. She played the grieving widow well. Very well. The perfect disappearance? John Darwin was declared legally dead in 2003 and collected a hefty life insurance payout, over £250,000, and received his pension benefits. The couple's debts, which had been spiraling out of control, were now conveniently erased. But here's the twist. John wasn't dead. Not even close. Just a year after faking his drowning, he was living in secret, in a room connected to their house, hidden behind a fake wall and a wardrobe. While and kept up the charade to neighbors and friends, John spent his days quietly sneaking around indoors and occasionally slipping out disguised with a wig and sunglasses. For nearly 5 years, he was a ghost, hidden, invisible, and utterly unrepentant. The Panama Plan. Eventually, the Darwins decided it was time for a new chapter. They wanted to start fresh, far from the prying eyes of Britain. So they began house hunting in Panama. Using John's false identity as John Jones, they traveled abroad together, exploring the possibility of buying land and building a new life under assumed names. And that's when their arrogance caught up with them. Because in 2006, while researching real estate, they posed for a smiling photo with a Panamanian real estate agent. That photo was uploaded online, publicly. At the time, no one noticed. But it would prove to be the smoking gun. The return of the dead man. In December 2007, out of the blue, John Darwin walked into a London police station and claimed amnesia. He said he had no memory of the past 5 years, only that he thought he was a missing person. The media exploded. A miracle. The dead canoeist had returned. But the story unraveled almost immediately. Journalists dug up the now infamous Panama photo, and within days, It was front-page news. The lie was exposed. John Darwin had faked his death and had helped him. Not only that, but they had lied to their own sons, who genuinely believed their father had drowned. The betrayal was enormous. Trial, sentence, and shame. The Darwins were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, from forged documents to international wire transfers. But the most damning element was their own gleeful photo from Panama. In court, and portrayed herself as a manipulated, emotionally abused woman. But the jury didn't buy it. She had played a central role in the deception, cashing checks, signing documents, even comforting her sons while knowing the truth. In 2008, John was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison, and got 6.5 years. Their sons disowned them. Aftermath, a strange new life. After serving half their sentences, both John and were released from prison, and has since lived quietly, giving occasional interviews where she expresses guilt and regret. John, meanwhile, has been spotted walking along the same seafront where he once died, living a far more low-key life than the one he planned in Panama. The story became the subject of documentaries, books, and in 2022, a hit British TV series titled The Thief, His Wife, and the Canoe. What makes this case so unforgettable isn't just the fraud, it's the sheer audacity of it all. Faking your death is one thing, but hiding behind a fake wall in your own home, tricking your own children, and then posing for a smiling photo in another country? That takes boldness. Or madness. Maybe both. Story number 7. The Elevator, the Tank, and the Unsolved Death of Elisa Lam. A girl disappears in a haunted hotel. What they find defies explanation. In January 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, a place with a grim reputation. Over the years, the Cecil had been home to serial killers, suicides, and strange deaths. It was even part of the inspiration for American Horror Story, Hotel. But Elisa didn't seem concerned. She was a Canadian student traveling solo, documenting her trip on Tumblr. She posted cute outfits, bookstore finds, and reflections on mental health. She had a bipolar disorder diagnosis, but she was functioning, alert, and eager to explore. Then, on January 31st, Elisa vanished. The search begins. Her family, who hadn't heard from her, grew worried. Elisa had always stayed in touch. Hotel staff said she had been acting a bit off, and that she had switched rooms after roommates complained about her behavior. But she didn't seem dangerous, just odd. When police searched the hotel, they found nothing. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. No one had seen her leave. Flyers with her photo were plastered around LA weeks past. And then came a discovery that changed everything. The elevator footage. On February 13th, LAPD released a 4-minute surveillance clip from one of the hotel's elevators, the last known sighting of Elisa Lam. The footage is disturbing. Elisa enters the elevator alone. She presses multiple buttons, but the doors won't close. She steps out. She looks around as if someone's following her. She jumps in, hides in the corner, peeks out. At times, she waves her arms in odd gestures, as if talking to someone invisible or dancing. Then she leaves, and the elevator finally closes on an empty hallway. The video quickly went viral. Millions of people were mesmerized and creeped out. The footage sparked endless theories. Was she being chased? Was someone hiding off camera? Was this a mental health crisis or something supernatural? Things only got weirder from there. The water tank. Hotel guests started complaining about low water pressure. Some said the water looked strange. Others said it tasted off. Maintenance staff checked the rooftop water tanks. They opened one, and inside, floating naked in the dark water, was Elisa Lam's decomposing body. No one could explain how she got there. Impossible questions. To access the water tanks, Elisa would have needed to reach the roof, which was supposedly locked and alarmed. Even if she got up there, she would have had to climb a ladder, open a heavy tank lid, and get inside. All by herself. While manic and undressed, there were no signs of trauma, no sexual assault, no drugs or alcohol in her system. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, likely linked to her bipolar disorder. But the internet wasn't satisfied. Theories, myths, and madness. Conspiracy theories exploded. Murder cover-up? Some speculated hotel staff or guests had something to hide. Paranormal activity? People pointed to the Cecil's sinister history, linking Elisa to the dark water, urban legend, and the tuberculosis outbreak near the time of her death, codenamed Elam Elisa. Alternate timelines and elevators to hell. YouTube went full creepypasta mode. Theories included ghost possession, secret government experiments, and Elisa being a sacrifice. What made it all worse was how calm the authorities were in their conclusion, as if her bizarre final moments were just another footnote in the Cecil's cursed legacy. Aftermath and legacy. Elisa Lam's death remains officially unsolved, though police stand by the theory of accidental drowning exacerbated by untreated mental illness. Her family filed a lawsuit against the hotel, which was eventually dismissed. The Cecil Hotel shut down shortly afterward, but reopened in 2021 under a new name, Stay on Main. Still, the legend remains. Netflix released a docuseries in 2021, Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, reigniting interest in the case and drawing criticism for how the internet treated Elisa more as a character than a real person. A mystery without closure. Whether you believe Elisa Lam was the victim of foul play, mental illness, or something beyond explanation, one thing is certain. Her final moments, captured forever in a flickering elevator, continue to haunt the web and the world. She walked into that elevator and never came back. Story number 8. The Accidental Confession of Robert Durst. A real estate heir, a trail of bodies, and a bathroom mic that caught what no one else could. Robert Durst was born into wealth, and not just any wealth. He was the eldest son of Seymour Durst, the head of a New York real estate empire worth billions. But Robert was never the golden boy. He was eccentric, antisocial, and increasingly paranoid. When his mother died under mysterious circumstances when he was just 7, something in him seemed to break. As he grew older, Robert drifted, not into obscurity, but into something darker. And as the years went by, people around him started disappearing. A missing wife, a cold case. In 1982, Robert's wife, Kathy Durst, vanished without a trace. The couple's marriage was reportedly abusive, and on the night she disappeared, Robert claimed he had dropped her off at the train station. He never reported her missing. A friend did, days later. Police were suspicious, but no body was found. No charges were filed. The case faded into the background. Then in 2000, things took a dramatic turn. Susan Berman, Robert's longtime friend and unofficial spokesperson, was found shot execution-style in her home in Los Angeles, just days before she was scheduled to talk to investigators about Kathy's disappearance. And then in 2001, as if that wasn't enough, Robert Durst's name surfaced in yet another case. The dismembered neighbor. Durst had moved to Galveston, Texas, disguised himself as a mute old woman, renting a small apartment. Why? He said he was hiding from media attention. That's when his neighbor, Morris Black, turned up dead and dismembered, his body parts floating in Galveston Bay. Durst was arrested and admitted to cutting up the body, claiming it was in self-defense after an accidental shooting. And the verdict? Not guilty. Yes, he walked. Rich, weird, and untouchable. Enter the Jinx. By 2010, Durst's bizarre life caught the attention of Hollywood. Filmmakers began creating a documentary series about him called The Jinx, based on his alleged involvement in 3 deaths. They somehow convinced Durst himself to participate, and that's when it all unraveled. Over the course of the interviews, Durst grew increasingly agitated. He stumbled over answers, denied obvious contradictions. But the moment that stunned the world came off camera, or so he thought. The hot mic confession. After a tense final interview, Durst stepped into the bathroom, still wearing his microphone. He began talking to himself in a whispering tone. And then he said it. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. The audio was chilling. A confession? A moment of madness? No one knows for sure. But when the filmmakers heard it during editing, they turned it over to authorities. The docuseries aired in 2015, the night before the final episode aired, and the shocking bathroom recording went public. Robert Durst was arrested in New Orleans, hiding out under a fake name. The trial and the end. In 2021, after years of delays, including during the COVID pandemic, Durst was finally put on trial for the murder of Susan Berman. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Days later, prosecutors in New York reopened the case of Kathy Durst's disappearance and filed murder charges. But Durst never stood trial for that crime. In January 2022, Robert Durst died in prison, aged 78. The mystery of Kathy's disappearance technically remains unsolved, though few doubt he was responsible. Legacy of a killer in disguise. Robert Durst was a rare kind of criminal. Not just wealthy, not just cunning, but weird. Truly bizarre. He cross-dressed to avoid detection, spoke in odd cadences, and whispered confessions to himself with a mic still recording. And he very nearly got away with all of it. It took a documentary, a bathroom, and a forgotten microphone to finally bring him down. Story number 9. The kidnapping hoax of Sherry Papini. She vanished without a trace. Returned with a horrific story. And then the truth came out. On November 2, 2016, in the quiet town of Redding, California, 34-year-old Sherry Papini vanished during an afternoon jog. Her husband, Keith, returned home from work to find her missing. Her car was still there. Her phone and earbuds were found just a short distance away. Earbuds neatly wrapped, a strand of her hair still attached. It looked like she'd been abducted. Keith was frantic. He called 911. Law enforcement launched an immediate search. Sherry was a young, attractive, blonde mother of 2. The media attention was instant and intense. The community rallied. Billboards went up. Celebrities posted about the case. Hashtag Bring Sherry Home trended. And then, 22 days later, Sherry reappeared. The return. In the early morning hours of Thanksgiving Day 2016, Sherry was found on the side of a road, battered, bruised, and chained. She was 140 miles from where she'd disappeared, near Sacramento. A driver spotted her frantically waving, thin, bloodied, with a chain around her waist and injuries covering her body. She'd lost weight. Her nose was bruised. Her long blonde hair had been chopped off. She had a brand burned into her shoulder. People were horrified. What had happened to her? Her story. Sherry told investigators she had been abducted by 2 Hispanic women, masked, armed, and cruel. They'd held her in a dark room for weeks, tortured her, beat her, and even branded her. They'd fed her irregularly. She'd been tied up. At one point, she claimed one woman helped her escape, which is how she ended up on the road. The public was both horrified and fascinated. The case became national news. She was hailed as a survivor, a woman who endured horrific abuse and lived to tell the tale. But there were red flags from the very beginning. The doubts. The sketch of her abductors was vague and almost cartoonish. Despite the intense media coverage, no leads ever surfaced. No one spotted 2 women buying supplies, acting strangely, or traveling with a captive woman. Nothing. Then there were inconsistencies in Sherry's story. Her injuries were real, but oddly distributed. The branding was strange. Her memory was fuzzy. Her statements changed. Still, the public was willing to believe her. Until 2020, when the FBI announced a major break in the case. One that would change everything. DNA doesn't lie. From the beginning, investigators had collected DNA from the clothing Sherry was wearing when she was found. In 2020, a match finally came through. The DNA did not match 2 Hispanic women. It matched a man named James Reyes, Sherry's ex-boyfriend. When confronted, Reyes confessed. He said Sherry had reached out to him in 2016, saying she wanted to escape her life, her husband, her responsibilities, everything. He picked her up, voluntarily. She stayed at his home, eating junk food, watching TV, and lying low. The bruises and injuries? She inflicted many of them on herself. The branding? Reyes helped her, at her request. She even cut her own hair to look more traumatized. There had been no abduction, no torture, no masked women. It was all a lie. Why she did it? When investigators finally confronted Sherry in 2022, she denied everything. Even after showing her the DNA match, the interviews, and text messages, she stuck to her story. Eventually, she broke down and admitted what she had done. She claimed she was unhappy in her marriage and wanted to disappear. But she also seemed to crave attention and sympathy. Experts believe her behavior is consistent with narcissistic tendencies or a deep psychological need for validation. But whatever her motivation, the damage was enormous. The fallout. Sherry was charged with making false statements to federal agents and mail fraud for collecting over $30,000 in victim assistance funds based on her fake kidnapping. In 2022, she pled guilty to staging the entire abduction. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, ordered to pay over $300,000 in restitution, and released a public apology through her lawyer, though many felt she showed little real remorse. Her husband, Keith, who had stood by her through everything, from tearful press conferences to raising their children alone, filed for divorce and full custody. The community that once searched for her, prayed for her, and donated money to the cause felt betrayed. America's real-life Gone Girl. The comparisons to the novel and film Gone Girl were immediate and constant. Just like in the story, a woman fakes her disappearance, frames others, and returns with a shocking tale that crumbles under scrutiny. But this wasn't fiction. It was real. And while it may have started as a cry for help or a twisted fantasy, it ended in criminal charges, shattered relationships, and national shame. Sherry Papini had the country's sympathy. She threw it all away, for reasons we may never fully understand. Story number 10. The Bear Brook Murders. DNA, aliases, and the chameleon killer. For bodies in barrels. A killer with no name. And a cold case that broke the rules and rewrote the playbook. In 1985, a hunter walking through the woods near Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire stumbled upon something strange. A 55-gallon metal drum, partially hidden in the trees, near a burned-down old store. Curious, he popped the lid open. Inside were two human bodies, dismembered and wrapped in plastic. The bodies were badly decomposed, a woman and a young girl. They had been there for years. Who were they? How did they get there? And who would dump them like trash? There were no answers, no IDs, no missing persons reports that matched. No DNA databases existed back then. The case quickly went cold. But it wasn't over. A second barrel, a bigger mystery. In 2000, 15 years later, police decided to revisit the Bear Brook crime scene. Incredibly, just 100 yards from the original barrel, they found another one. Same type, same condition. Inside, two more bodies. Two young girls. Like the first, they were wrapped in plastic and left to rot. Now, investigators had 4 victims, all female. 1 adult, 3 children. Likely a family. Murdered and hidden in the woods. But still, no names. No suspects. No motive. Just bones, barrels, and silence. Until a twist arrived in California. A guy named Curtis. In 2002, 27-year-old Eunsoon Jun was reported missing in Richmond, California. She was dating a man named Curtis Kimball, a quiet, strange guy who worked as an electrician and didn't say much about his past. Police went to her house and made a grim discovery. Eunsoon's body had been dismembered and stored in, wait for it, a cat litter box. Curtis was arrested and eventually convicted of her murder. But investigators soon learned that Curtis Kimball was not his real name. In fact, he had gone by dozens of names over the years. Gordon Jensen, Larry Vanner, Jerry Mockerman, Bob Evans, and more. He was a ghost, a man who slipped from state to state, job to job, name to name, leaving behind chaos and death. And wherever he went, children disappeared. The DNA breakthrough. By 2015, forensic science had come a long way. And so had a new investigative tool, genetic genealogy, the process of using public DNA databases to build family trees and identify unknown people. When this technique was applied to the Bear Brook victims, 2 major revelations came fast. The adult woman and 2 of the children were related, a mother and her daughters. The third child, the youngest, was not related to the others, but had been killed and dumped in the same way. In 2017, authorities finally confirmed what had long been suspected. The man known as Curtis Kimball, aka Bob Evans, was the killer in the Bear Brook case. He had been the common thread, a mysterious drifter who inserted himself into families and destroyed them from within. But there was still more. The girl who survived. In 1981, long before the California murder or the discovery of the barrels, a man calling himself Gordon Jensen had shown up at an RV park in California with a little girl. He told people she was his daughter. She was quiet, malnourished, and seemed afraid of him. He later abandoned her. When authorities took custody of the girl, they realized she had been abducted. Her name was Lisa, and Gordon was not her father. Lisa was adopted, and for years, the mystery of her origins remained unsolved. That is, until genetic genealogy traced her DNA back to Bob Evans, the same man behind the Bear Brook murders. He wasn't Lisa's father, but he had kidnapped her from somewhere, her real parents unknown. And it got worse. Because around the same time Lisa was taken, a woman named Denise Bowden, her likely mother, had vanished from Manchester, New Hampshire. She had been dating a man named Bob Evans. She was never seen again. The web unravels. Let's pause and review. Bob Evans killed Eunsoon Jun in California. Bob Evans abandoned a kidnapped child in the 1980s. Bob Evans was the last person seen with a missing woman in New Hampshire. Bob Evans murdered a woman and 3 children and left their bodies in barrels in Bear Brook State Park. But Bob Evans wasn't really Bob Evans. He was born Terry Petter Rasmussen in 1943 in Colorado. He served in the Navy, was married with children, then vanished in the 1970s. He surfaced decades later as a series of aliases, moving through the country like a ghost, changing his name whenever the heat got too close. He died in prison in 2010, before authorities confirmed who he really was. In total, Rasmussen is confirmed to have killed at least 5 people, but he is suspected of many more. The Bear Brook victims identified. In 2019, more than 30 years after their bodies were discovered, the 3 related victims from the barrels were finally identified. Marliest Elizabeth Marley Vaughn, age 24 to 35, the mother. Marie Vaughn, age 6 to 10. Sarah Lynn McWaters, age 1 to 3. They were last seen in California in the early 1980s with Rasmussen. He had been dating Marliest, likely gained her trust, and then murdered her and her children. Their bodies were found thousands of miles away in New Hampshire. The identity of the 4th child, the youngest girl not related to the others, was unknown for decades. But in 2022, using forensic genealogy, she was identified as Ariana Ari Romero, a child Rasmussen had also taken in. Her origins still unclear, but her fate now tragically certain. The Chameleon Killer. Terry Rasmussen is now known as the Chameleon Killer, a man who changed identities like socks, using false names to slip into women's lives, manipulate them, then kill them and sometimes their children. He lived in trailer parks, worked as a handyman, seemed friendly, sometimes charming, and no one ever really knew who he was. He died before justice could catch him. But thanks to science and the persistence of amateur sleuths and genealogists, his crimes are finally being revealed, even if answers still come with painful questions. The legacy of Bear Brook. The Bear Brook case is now considered a landmark in criminal investigation. It was one of the first cold cases ever solved through forensic genealogy, a technique that has since identified dozens of unknown victims and captured criminals, including the Golden State Killer. But at its heart, the Bear Brook case is a tragedy. It's about women who trusted the wrong man, about children whose lives were cut short, about the cruelty of someone who wore so many masks. Even his own family had no idea who he really was. It's a story of barrels, aliases, bones, and a monster hiding in plain sight. Bonus story: the mysterious case of Lori Vallow and the Doomsday Murders. A beauty queen, a cult-like romance, and 2 missing children whose fate would haunt the world. At first glance, Lori Vallow looked like the picture of the all-American mom. Blonde, charming, attractive, deeply religious, and a former beauty pageant contestant. She smiled easily, raised her children in suburban neighborhoods, and seemed to be a loving mother and devoted wife. But behind the family photos was a story darker than fiction, one involving doomsday prophecies, apocalyptic cult beliefs, sudden deaths, and 2 children who simply vanished. This is the story of how Lori Vallow and her new husband, Chad Daybell, went from average suburbanites to centerpieces in one of the most disturbing criminal cases in recent history. Before the disappearance, Lori had been married several times, and her personal life was complicated. In 2006, she married Charles Vallow, a successful businessman. Together, they adopted Joshua J.J. Vallow, a bright, affectionate boy with autism. Lori also had a teenage daughter, Tylee Ryan, from a previous marriage. But things began to change around 2018. Lori became obsessed with end-times theology, ideas pulled from fringe Mormon beliefs mixed with New Age mysticism. She claimed to have special spiritual powers, including the ability to see people's auras, and began identifying certain people, including loved ones, as either light or dark spirits. And then she met Chad Daybell. Enter the prophet. Chad was a doomsday author, former gravedigger, and self-proclaimed prophet who published dozens of bizarre books about the end of the world, spiritual portals, and past lives. He was married with children and lived in Idaho. Lori and Chad hit it off immediately, both obsessed with apocalyptic visions and spiritual warfare. They believed they had been married in past lives and were destined to lead the righteous through the upcoming apocalypse. According to Chad and Lori, the world was ending soon. But first, certain people had to die. Death begins to follow. In July 2019, Lori's then-husband, Charles Vallow, was shot and killed by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, during a supposed domestic dispute. Alex claimed self-defense. Lori didn't seem bothered. She threw a pool party later that day. 2 months later, in September 2019, Tylee Ryan, age 16, vanished. Lori told people she was away at college. There were no classes, no records, no contact. Just days later, J.J. Vallow, age 7, also disappeared. Lori claimed he was with friends, or at a special school, or maybe he was just with his grandmother. None of it was true. Suspicion grows. The lies were piling up. In October 2019, Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy, suddenly died in her sleep. Chad insisted she had a bad cough. He declined an autopsy. Just 2 weeks later, Lori and Chad were married on a beach in Hawaii. Tammy was buried in Idaho. Lori was smiling for wedding photos in a white dress, holding hands with Chad. In November, relatives began demanding to see JJ and Tylee. Lori refused. She told police they were fine, but she couldn't produce them. Then she stopped answering questions entirely and fled to Hawaii with Chad. At this point, both kids were officially missing, and Lori was named a person of interest. The country watched in horror as the smiling, doomsday mom walked barefoot on Hawaiian beaches while refusing to say whether her children were alive. The discovery. After months of investigation, in June 2020, police obtained a search warrant for Chad Daybell's backyard in Rexburg, Idaho. They began digging. They found human remains buried under layers of earth and concrete. One was charred and dismembered. The other had been stuffed into a plastic bag and wrapped in duct tape. It was JJ and Tylee. JJ was still in his red pajamas. Tylee had been so badly burned and dismembered that her body was unrecognizable. Her remains had to be identified through dental records. Chad Daybell was arrested on the spot. Lori, already in custody on charges of child desertion, was now facing murder charges. The cult beliefs that killed. As the case unfolded, prosecutors revealed the horrifying belief system behind the murders. Lori and Chad believed that some people, including their own children, were possessed by evil spirits. Once dark, they were no longer truly human. Chad used a rating system to measure people's spiritual purity and claimed he could detect if someone was a zombie. Lori claimed that JJ and Tylee were no longer her children. Their bodies were just shells, inhabited by demons. To them, killing the children wasn't murder, it was salvation. The trial. A mother on the stand. Lori Vallow Daybell's trial began in 2023, and it was as chilling as expected. Prosecutors played phone calls, text messages, and evidence showing Lori and Chad mocking the deaths of their spouses, planning the burial of her children, and sending cryptic, prophetic messages to each other. One text from Chad to Lori, days after Tylee's disappearance, read, "I feel so relieved. One more hurdle gone." Lori's defense? She wasn't the one who physically killed the children. Maybe Alex Cox did it. Maybe Chad. But jurors didn't buy it. In May 2023, Lori was found guilty on all counts, including the first-degree murder of JJ and Tylee. She was later sentenced to multiple life sentences without parole. Chad Daybell will face trial separately. Prosecutors have said they will seek the death penalty. What about the others? Alex Cox, Lori's brother, who killed Charles Vallow and allegedly helped bury JJ and Tylee, died suddenly in 2019 of what was ruled natural causes. Many remain skeptical. Charles Vallow, who had pleaded with police and family to intervene before he was killed, left behind a heartbreaking trail of warning signs no one heeded. Tammy Daybell, Chad's first wife, was later exhumed, and her autopsy revealed she had been asphyxiated, murdered, likely by Chad himself. Lori and Chad may have planned to start a new life with all the dark spirits out of the way and their children in the ground. The smile that haunts. Throughout her trial, Lori often smiled in court. She giggled. She whispered with her attorneys. She showed no visible grief for her children. Her defense painted her as manipulated by Chad, but evidence showed she was just as involved in the planning, execution, and cover-up. When JJ's grandfather was asked what justice would look like, he said, "Justice would be hearing my grandson's laughter again." Beyond belief. The case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell is shocking not just because of the deaths, but because of how cold, calculated, and faith-driven it all was. It's a story of beliefs so extreme they turned love into murder. A mother who decided her own children were expendable in her twisted version of salvation. And in the end, 2 innocent children paid the price for her prophecy. Behind the facade, what these 11 true crime stories reveal about human nature. What do a haunted house in New Jersey, a smiling mother in Hawaii, and a serial killer who asks the police for tech advice have in common? More than you'd think. These 11 true crime cases aren't just about murder or mystery. They're about trust, identity, and what we choose to believe, even when the truth is right in front of us. Let's look deeper. Why do we believe lies when the truth is too painful? When Nicholas Barkley vanished and a grown man showed up years later pretending to be him, with the wrong accent, wrong eye color, wrong everything, his family still embraced him. Why? Was it love? Denial? Or something darker? Guilt, perhaps, or complicity? In the case of Sherry Papini, we wanted a survivor story. A mom returned. A tale of trauma and escape. But the real story, that she'd faked it all to run away with an ex, felt like a betrayal, not just of her family, but of our collective hope for justice. What does it say about us that we so often want to believe the prettier lie? What do killers really look like? Is it the disheveled stranger in an alley? Or the friendly man in the church pews? BTK was a family man, a scout leader, a city employee. He walked his dog. And yet, for decades, he was binding, torturing, and killing behind closed doors. Chad Daybell was a soft-spoken religious author. His backyard became a shallow grave for 2 children. Terry Rasmussen, the Bear Brook killer, was a helpful handyman, a babysitter, even a dad figure, while disposing of entire families in barrels. Do we miss the monsters because they don't look like monsters? How much of what we call evil is just ego in disguise? Some kill for money, some kill for power. But in cases like Robert Durst or Audrey Marie Hilley, what stands out is the performance. Durst, mumbling to himself in a bathroom, confessed with the arrogance of someone who thought he could never be caught. Hilley faked her own death, returned as her twin sister, and nearly got away with it, until paperwork tripped her up. How often do people destroy lives simply because they think they're smarter than everyone else? What do we owe the victims when the story is stranger than fiction? Elisa Lam's case captured the internet. Millions dissected her final elevator video, spinning wild theories. But in the frenzy, Elisa became less of a person and more of a character in a ghost story. How do we tell these stories, fascinating as they are, without turning real pain into entertainment? What makes a mother kill her own children? This question haunts several of these cases. Lori Vallow claimed her kids were possessed. Dee Dee Blanchard made her daughter believe she was sick her entire life. Both justified their actions through twisted love, one via prophecy, the other through control. Can maternal instinct turn toxic? When does care become cruelty? When does belief become a weapon? And most disturbingly, why didn't anyone stop them sooner? How many crimes are never solved simply because they're too unbelievable? A man living behind a closet wall. A family accepting a stranger as their lost child. A killer asking, "You can't trace a floppy disk, right?" and expecting a straight answer. These aren't movie plots. These really happened. So how many unsolved cases remain unsolved not because there isn't evidence, but because no one is willing to believe what that evidence points to? The uncomfortable truth? We all want to think we'd see the signs, that we'd know, that we wouldn't be fooled. But the people in these stories, the friends, the families, the neighbors, said the same thing. They trusted. They overlooked. They explained away red flags until it was too late. So maybe the better question is this. If it happened around you, would you even notice?